citizens. It recounts the fortunes of each, the first an exile, the second an emigrant, based on a year I spent in Berlin, taking the measure of blood and history in the midst of rising rightist populism on both sides of the Atlantic. My grandfather was a book publisher who commanded the German literary landscape before World War I. Kurt Wolff had been born to a mother of Jewish descent, but it was his eye for das Neue, the new, that would put him at odds with the times, as Adolf Hitler and his repressive and hateful politics grew more and more popular. A bulky peace, hyperinflation, and social turmoil conspired to undermine the Kurt Wolff Verlag until he was forced to shut down his publishing house in 1930. 3 years later, Kurt fled Nazi Germany, eventually landing in New York, where in 1941 he founded Pantheon Books. He left behind my father, Nikolaus Wolff, who served in the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of the Third Reich, and wound up in an American POW camp before emigrating to the United States in 1948. From my birth in 1957 until my father's death 50 years later, the prevailing winds of assimilation kept his eyes trained ahead. I contented myself with a seat in that boat, facing those calm waters. The fresh start conformism of post-war America did nothing to encourage him to glance backward, and if he didn't look back, I was hardly moved to do so. I joined him in making our way through the world with purpose and hard work. Germans call this therapy by industriousness taking the Arbeitskur. But a decade after my father's death, having just turned 60, I found myself being pulled back through the years. I wanted a better sense of the European chapters in the lives of my forefathers and the bloody period in which they unfolded. I was moved more than anything by a nagging sense of oversight, a feeling that I had failed somehow in not investigating my family's past. Germans of my generation grilled their elders about National Socialism, asking parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles what they had known and what they had done. In Germany, the convulsions of the 60s and early 70s came with dope and rock and civil unrest, to be sure, but also with the belief that the Wirtschaftswunder, the West German economic boom, had been enabled by a corporate and political establishment studded with ex-Nazis. A younger generation charged its elders with suspending accountability and remembrance and indulging in an Arbeitskur writ large. A broadly held willingness to take up and work through questions of guilt, shame, and responsibility, known as Vergangenheitsaufarbeitung, or working off the past, has since become a marker of modern Germany. A German cousin, my father's godson and his namesake, exactly my age and a fellow journalist, asked me pointedly why we decided to up and move to Berlin. You, I replied, took up the whole working off the past thing long ago. As an American, I never did. Cousin Niko understood right away. He had spent his youth brandishing his countercultural sympathies, taking part in the purification ritual for the sins of the fathers. But surely I could be excused for being late to that work. Our family, the Wolffs of Wilmington, Delaware, Princeton, New Jersey, and Rochester, New York, was hardly German anymore. What historical stock-taking I'd done dealt with American evils, slavery, and Jim Crow, sins that implicated my mother's ancestors. Though my father arrived in the United States as a 27-year-old speaking only basic English, his new country's integrative ways ensured that he was quickly regarded as no less American than the Connecticut-raised wasp he would marry. So it was, after 36 years on the staff of Sports Illustrated, that I took a buyout and wired the severance payment to a German bank. My wife, Vanessa, gave notice at the agency where she worked as a visiting nurse. We found a couple to move into our old farmhouse in Vermont and look after our dog and cat, and enrolled our teenage children, Frank and Clara, in an international school on the outskirts of Berlin. We signed a year's lease on an apartment in Kreuzberg, where our neighbors would hail from more than 190 countries, and gentrification hadn't entirely sanded down a gritty Levantine edge. Berlin is